Hello, I'm Ian. Welcome to my channel. There are two things about me. I'm over 60. Right, let's wheel on the first stereotype. My degree and career were in science and technology. So now you know three things about me. Now, I hate these two stereotypes. I don't think they apply to me, and they don't apply to a lot of people who are like me, my age and my background. So you might think this talk is about stereotypes, and you may be right, but I think there's a bit more to it than that. So we'll call this talk, Were We Woke in the 60s? Whatever that means. So this is Samantha Price. She's the headmistress of Benenden School, a prestigious independent school in Kent, England. Fees in excess of £10,000 per term. And in November 2021, the BBC reported her as saying, adults should stop mocking young people by calling them woke for standing up for things they believe in. Now, I thought that being called woke was a compliment, not that I ever used the word myself, except to say I woke at 6 this morning, and I'm sure it's okay to still say that. Anyway, more about woke later. But first, a little bit more about Benenden. Here are a couple of famous alumni from the past. Lady Victoria Harvey and Princess Royal. I have pronounced her name correctly, by the way, Victoria. Back in 2003, Lady Victoria Harvey was quoted as saying, "It's so bad being homeless in winter. They should go somewhere warm like the Caribbean where they can eat fresh fish all day." That's sympathetic, but possibly not very practical. In 1971, Princess Anne, she's the one on the right, won the BBC Sports Personality of the Year. I don't think she's done anything of note since then. Now, some time back, I was reading various comments on social media, and a summary of them would be, old people voted for Brexit, and in 10 years' time, they'll be dead and we can have another vote. Now, look, you get what you pay for. You're not paying anything for this, so don't expect top quality graphics. Anyway, to get back to the issue, here's the problem. Why am I taking issue with people whose opinions I probably don't fundamentally disagree with? Let's go back in time. I grew up in the 1960s, the swinging 60s as they were called, which, as well as its music and rather dubious fashions, was also notable for social and political change. There were marches protesting the development of nuclear weapons. In fact, the first Aldermaston marches were back in the 1950s. And the people marching were not just British, but they were joined by people from Australia and Sweden. And as you can see by the look of them, they were obviously disreputable and untrustworthy. Of course, in America, in the 60s, you had the Vietnam War demonstrations. But they also took place in other countries. This one is actually from Australia, and this is from New Zealand. Many people forget that Australia and New Zealand actually took part in the Vietnam War. Meanwhile, the French, never ones to miss out on a revolution, were having their own demonstrations. These were particularly violent and really threatened to bring down the French government. These pictures show the demonstrations and the violence on the streets. But I would like to mention one thing. Look at this gentleman here, how smart he is. You wouldn't get British people demonstrating wearing jackets and ties. I mean, they went to duffel coats at best. Back in Britain, even the homosexuals were revolting. The United States as well. The 1960s saw the start of the environmental movement, at least according to the front cover of this book. And there were demonstrations in the United States about clean air. But clean air was noted from an earlier period. This is from the London smog of 1952. Thousands of people died from air pollution. And as a result, a law was passed in 1956 called the Clean Air Act. In the United States, the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom attracted more than 250,000 people to hear Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream. But not everyone was in favour of racial equality. You might like to consider that these photographs are from the 1960s, not the 1860s. And some of those demonstrating, and certainly members of their family, will still be alive today. In the UK, there were major changes to the law on obscenity, for example. This book was very important to avoid if you had servants, apparently. And the prosecution counsel made the startling statement that girls could read as well as boys, something presumably not widely understood at the time. The trial was extremely popular and people queued to get in. I find this newspaper headline quite interesting in that it personifies Lady Chatterley herself, that is a fictional character in the novel, as though she were the one on trial rather than the publisher himself. Anyway, these are the members of the jury, clearly a disreputable and rebellious lot. At this time, jury service was restricted to homeowners and named tenants, so not everyone on the electoral register, which is the case now. But it wasn't all about protesting. Young people had fun too. Mods and rockers, whatever they were, had get-togethers in seaside resorts like Hastings, Brighton, where they kicked lumps out of each other. It's interesting to think that some of those involved are now living in care homes in these very same resorts. Someone even wrote a song about it. Who? No, I can't remember who. Did these protests and demonstrations achieve anything? Well, yes, there were social and legal changes. Oral contraceptive became available in the UK in 1961. Racial Equality Act in 1965. The abolition of capital punishment, also in 1965. Abortion law was reformed in 1967. Homosexuality was legitimised in 1967, and divorce law reform came in 1969. I appreciate that the reforms in homosexuality and racial equality in particular were quite limited. And what was the outcome of all this? I don't know how those who celebrated the Summer of Love in 1968 voted, but in 1979, Margaret Thatcher was elected Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, and followed by Ronald Reagan voted in as President of the United States, neither of whom would be considered to be great social reformers. France did elect the socialist François Mitterrand, who then demonstrated his environmentalist credentials by ordering the sinking of the Rainbow Warrior, allegedly. Back in the 1960s, we thought we had all the answers. We didn't. And I certainly don't have any answers. I'm not even sure that I know what the questions are. But I do think that however justified your concerns, shouting at people, threatening them, making their lives difficult, is unlikely to persuade them to change their lifestyle. At best, or at worst, it will coerce them. And people coerced form an unstable body politic. If you think the answer to the problems is simple, then you're wrong. This is Bertrand Russell, famous philosopher and mathematician. He had also taken part in the first Aldermaster March and various anti-nuclear demonstrations. In 1959, he was interviewed on the BBC Face-to-Face programme. At the end of the interview, he said, "In this world, which is getting more and more closely interconnected, we have to learn to tolerate each other. We have to learn to put up with the fact that some people say things we don't like. We can only live together in that way. And if we are to live together and not die together, we must learn a kind of charity and a kind of tolerance which is absolutely vital to the continuation of human life on this planet." So I don't know what government we will have 40 years on, nor how those demonstrating today will vote, but I am confident that they will be complaining about the youth of the day, because it was ever thus. The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority, they show disrespect for elders, and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up dainties at the table, cross their legs and tyrannize their teachers. So who said this? It was Socrates, about 2,500 years ago. And you know, if Socrates were alive today, well, he'd be a very old man. Oh yes, what about woke? Well, it was first used back in its current form in 1962. Something else to blame the 60s for, I suppose. I hope you found my first foray into YouTube interesting and thought-provoking. Please leave a comment below. You'll see that some people have already made comments. If you liked it, click the like button and recommend it to your friends. If you didn't like it, well, recommend it to people who are not your friends. Subscribe button and hit the bell so that you can receive all notifications directly. And I hope you'll see me again in future. Thank you.